Birmingham versus Wrexham was an interesting game for many reasons. One side relegated from the Championship last season while the other promoted from League Two. Birmingham sat in 6th, Wrexham sat top of the pile. All the fact that Birmingham broke the record transfer fee for a League One club, there's always going to be attention on a game like this. However, the discourse after the game revolved mainly around the owners. The similarities across the ownerships are blatantly apparent. Both are backed by big American consortiums with huge American celebrities as the face of the operation. This of course stemmed the discourse that Americans are ruining football by commercialising the game, pricing out the fans and ignoring the essence of what makes English football so special. The first that did so was famously Malcolm and Avram Glazer when they purchased Manchester United in 2005. It was a relationship that saw a lot of success in the early days but now has turned stale and strained as fans push for them to sell the club. Now 19 years later, exactly half of the Premier League clubs have an American owning at least 10% of the club, with 9 having an American as the controlling or sole shareholder. So they certainly hold a huge say in the future of English football. In this video we discuss our fears over American owners and whether they will ruin our beautiful game. Alright, let's talk about it then. I think Americans in English football have certainly been controversial over the last 20 years, especially with a lot of the ideas that have been floated when you go back to the original 39th Premier League game idea and all the other ideas to take the English football out of England, domestic football games out of England. A lot of that has come from Americans. I think that's why this frustration around American ownership has come from.
Yeah, I definitely think so. As you say, the more weird and wacky ideas that are wanted by Americans to change the Premier League definitely seem to spur on the negativity that is, towards American owners, towards American fans of the Premier League. And I think that is because, when Americans have joined the Premier League or they've tried to create ideas or they're owning a football club in England, not just the Premier League but in England, I think that they don't do it quietly. There's always a fuss, whether it's in the Premier League or lower down. There is always a big thing about an American owner coming to England and taking over a football club.
They just don't quite seem to get it. And I think there is a huge cultural difference in how Americans view sport and how people in England view sport. Because I think for English football fans, tradition is the most important thing. You see people's reaction to the FA Cup, quite rightfully, getting rid of... the reaction's rightful. Getting rid of those replays in the early rounds, which really hurts the smaller clubs. And obviously that's to lighten the fixture load for the top clubs. And I get why they need to do that to a certain extent. But a lot of that is because they are playing weird and wacky tournaments, like the FIFA Club World Cup coming up. Which again, a lot of the American owners, like the Glazers, like Todd Boehly, have all been backing massively. So it's a really difficult situation because obviously we have got so many now in the Premier League and there are so many frustrations there. I want to talk about a few different clubs, use a few different clubs as examples and to look at some of the positives and negatives of American ownership in English football then. Let's start with Birmingham. What a tumultuous 12 months. I'm not even sure it's been 12 months yet since they were taken over by Barry Cook and obviously a few other members there, most notably Tom Brady, of course. But obviously when they were bought, they had John Eustace in charge and they were sitting quite high in the Championship table. Looked like they might make a run at the playoffs, which is really exciting. So they sacked him, which is obviously the most rational thing to do. And they brought in Wayne Rooney, who had done very little good management. He did well at Derby with very limited budget. He was terrible at DC United. And they took that and went, well, we're going to sack a really good manager and we're going to bring in Wayne Rooney, which was interesting. Obviously, everyone knows they got relegated after that. They're now in League One, where they have spent 25 million, which is, of course, a record for a transfer spend from a club in League One. So it's been a very long year.
It has.
A lot has happened. I think while there is optimism for the future, you can't say anything other than the fact it's been overwhelmingly negative for Birmingham so far.
Yeah, I think so. The thing with Birmingham, again, you speak about, as in terms of the tradition of it. Every time you think of Birmingham City Football Club, you think of being in the Championship, and you think of of being kind of being a staple hold in that league for so many years. And within the first season of American ownership, they managed to get out of the Championship and go the wrong way down the football ladder. I think it was just... But again, that's what I spoke about with coming in, and they never do it quietly. They did everything possible to make sure they were in the headlines by sacking a manager that had you performing so well. They went for Wayne Rooney. Why? Because he's probably the only bloke they knew. And they went, oh, he's Wayne Rooney. I know who Wayne Rooney is. Let's bring him in. And he's not a good manager. And now that and then they got relegated, which was a massive shame. It was something that we never expected to see. And yes, they might have money, and yes, they might help the club, and the branding of the club as well will grow exponentially. But the fact they've dropped down a division in the first place is already putting themselves on the back foot massively.
The thing is, theoretically, for Birmingham, if you consider them just as an on-pitch footballing outfit, long-term, I think this will benefit them. Because they will have increased revenue, because they now have that investment. Yes, it didn't work last season. Maybe the Americans didn't realise they could get relegated. Who knows? But they did get relegated. They're in League One now. But I think they will go up this season. If the form in the first five matches has been anything to go off, I think Birmingham will be one of the strongest teams in the division. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I do think, though, they are, as I say, on a good long-term plan. And we will probably be looking at a situation where they are in the Premier League eventually. If that will be their goal and the money that's coming in should work. The question mark is over the fans and whether the club will remain connected to its community. Because I think that's the issue for so many of these clubs taken over by American owners. They don't seem to get it that football is for the fans, first and foremost. I think it's more of an overall Premier League issue now rather than just an American issue. I think it's more that in Championship in League One where foreign ownership is less common. We are seeing these American owners and they look like huge outliers. In the Premier League, it's almost become normalised now, this behaviour that just doesn't associate the club and the community at all. Of course, there's efforts from people like the managers, from some of the players, from members of staff within the club, and from some directors and sporting directors and stuff. We do see that you see elements of trying to connect with the community, but the majority of running a football club now is very corporate, very business-like. And I get it from a competitive standpoint, but that's just not what football embodies for me.
No, it's not. You think the thing about football is on a weekend, it's the pride and getting behind your team, and we've seen on so many occasions. I mean, as you say, with owners overall, but also with American owners, is the fact they just don't understand the whole pride behind it. They treat it like a business. It's not a business. Football is for the fans. It's for the pride and the backing and the community that you build off of supporting that football team. That's your club. You love that club, and when it's not being treated like something you care about, it can be frustrating. And I think that is definitely something that you don't see very often at all nowadays, is an owner that clearly loves the club and isn't just in it for the commercial side of things. So that's definitely a big shame. And I think the other common theme seems to be that we've seen at Birmingham, we've seen at other clubs that we'll touch on, is the American owners, even if they eventually will get it right, in their first couple years, everything seems to be an absolute mess, and everything that does go wrong everything that could go wrong does go wrong.
Yeah, that is very true. I think the reason I wanted this video was from something Barry Cook, the owner, the majority shareholder of Birmingham, said on Monday night after the game between Wrexham and Birmingham. He said that it would be a great idea to host English football games in the USA, obviously specifically referencing Birmingham and Wrexham, given such strong ties to America. Now, obviously, this was met with a lot of backlash, and understandably so. And actually, the most intriguing bit of backlash was from JJ Watt, who is of course a part owner of Burnley Football Club, former NFL player or current NFL player, I believe, saying the beauty of the English game is the history, the tradition, the passion. Let's not mess with what makes it great. Now that's paraphrasing from what was a longer comment on X, but I think that shows the difference in owners. And JJ Watt is someone I've always thought gets it. While so many Americans don't, we've seen him walking around in like art of football stuff, and I think that shows he understands what. And obviously, if you don't own a bit of art of football clothing, you don't get football. That's not what I'm saying, but it shows he gets that deeper connection that football is more than just a game for a lot of people. He's attended games. He said before that even though he can't get to Turf Moor all that often because of his schedule, he does watch every game that he can. When they're in the Premier League, especially because obviously that's all broadcast out in America. So. Yeah, I think he's shown the difference between the two there, and I quite liked him coming out quite publicly disagreeing with Barry Cook. Though overall, I think this weird feud type stuff on Twitter between owners has just been a bit odd. Like a lot of the discourse before the Birmingham Wrexham game was owners beefing on Twitter, and we heard Tom Brady, who was at the Birmingham Wrexham game, talking before kickoff, and it just didn't feel like he truly got it. He didn't really understand English football.
Yeah, no,
And I get it because they're not from England.
No.
But then why, they come in because it's an investment, it's an opportunity to earn money, and that's what they all love doing. But you've got to have an emotional connection.
exactly. And I think I'm not saying, as you say, they shouldn't understand it from minute one, but it's about learning to understand it. It's at least trying to go down there and talk to the fans. Don't act like this corporate bloke who just sits in a suit and only you only see him when he walks out of his executive box and you don't see him. Go down, get involved with the fans, be part of the club, and that's the big thing. Is owners just aren't part of clubs anymore. They aren't what the club is about. And yeah, I definitely think. I mean, that statement is completely wrong. The one of the English games should be hosted in the USA. Absolutely not. I mean, there's no. That should not happen. And if it does ever happen, that would be the worst thing to happen. One of the worst things to ever happen to English football, because I mean that would be mental.
I mean, even anywhere outside of England, that is just or Wales.
Yeah.
For Cardiff and Swansea, they've not got to play their games.
And
Wrexham, of course. But yeah, they haven't got to play their games just inside the border to count. But let's talk about Wrexham then, because obviously it's a very different story to Birmingham. It's been unprecedented success for Wrexham. I think probably the only other team that have sort of climbed the divisions in this way are Luton Town, which is actually a very different story. It's opposite ends of the spectrum, really. But they've both had a very similar climb through the ranks so far. And I think that the fact that they bought a club there was such little risk with buying Wrexham, because they're in the National League and because any sort of investment would jump you through, it's given them that time to understand English football. Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney going to watch the National League games. It's a very different atmosphere. It's a very different game to going to a championship game, not really getting it, and then the consequences are much lower, because realistically, with the money Wrexham put in their first season, they were never going to get relegated from the National League.
No.
So jeopardy was less. The problem with buying Birmingham and not knowing what you're doing is that if you do get that wrong, as they did, you go down to League One. There is that jeopardy there. But obviously, it has been a huge success. We're back-to-back promotions under the new ownership. Obviously, it's brought in this huge media attention. You can't watch a single other League One game, but you can watch every Wrexham match on Sky this season. Big sponsors, big progress. It's all positive for Wrexham, and I get why people hate them to a certain extent, because obviously the money has cut. They have had all this investment, have had all this money. There is all this attention on them, but for Wrexham fans, I think it's really nice for them.
Yeah, very much so. I think the owners, for me, as you say, they show a clear interest. They know clearly they've taken advice and they know what they're doing. I think it does help that obviously, being who they are, they're not necessarily just businessmen. They're not just they're not necessarily just big corporate blokes who come in and buy a football team. They aren't those business people that don't really have a life. But in terms of, I think they've done quite well, and clearly they have must have got experience from other people who did know what they were doing. I do think this year is the test in League One, because for me the investment saw them through the National League, it saw them through League Two pretty easily. For me, League One, you don't just win on investment. You have to play well. You have to have the right things in place to get out of League One. You don't just win League One simply because you've got the most money. And I think that will be the bigger test.
I don't think they've climbed through the other leagues just because they have the most money. I know I made that comment saying, obviously, with that investment, it's difficult not to, but they did go and make the right appointment in that managerial position.
Yeah.
They have gone and signed the right players. Obviously, you can have a lot of investment and still buy bad players. They have done well with that. And so, to a certain extent, fair enough. But obviously that has all come because of the money, and I think that's where a lot of the frustration towards Wrexham comes from. But for Wrexham fans, for the club as a whole, and that's what the discussion is here.
Yeah.
Are American owners bad for English football? Well, a part of that is the clubs involved, and for Wrexham, it has been a very positive experience. For English football as a whole, has Wrexham's climb been bad for English football? Probably not. So
yeah, no, I wouldn't. I don't think it's had too much of a problem.
Other League One clubs will complain, but there's only one. Like realistically, they're only denying one club that promotion. Because
Yeah.
obviously every other club in the league will have their frustrations about it. There's only going to be one club difference in going up and stuff like that. So I get the frustration, but at the same time, it's not like they are spending billions and billions and they don't have Ronaldo up front in League One or something
exactly.
like that.
And then that's the thing. It's not like they've waltzed the leagues. I mean, the National League went down to the goal. Between them and Notts County was extremely close. League Two, they didn't take they didn't walk either. So they're still being tested.
They didn't win League Two, did they?
No. They were promoted, but I think they are. I think you have to give the players and the staff credit because they're obviously they are good players, but the investments have been very, very the investments have been in the right areas, and you've still got to put it together on the pitch. As we've seen about the next club we're going to talk about, doesn't matter how much money you spend, you've still got to get it right on the pitch.
Oh, that's a lovely segue into Chelsea Football Club, of course, and bought by Todd Bowley on the Clear Lake Capital Consortium in 2022. Now it feels like ages ago, doesn't it? But so much has happened in that time. I think the best way to describe it is a mess. Just a complete and utter mess. But yeah, 1.3 billion I think the transfer outlay is. Obviously that doesn't consider the income as well, which sees it as I think it's a net of closer to 600 million, 500 million, something like that. It's still an awful lot of money. That's the quite obvious statistic behind it all. Again, it just doesn't feel like Bowley and Clear Lake have got it for the first year. It feels this year, I will say, it feels like with a lot of what Todd Bowley's been saying, especially back in May when he was talking, he did like a world tour type thing. I don't know what he's doing, but he kept popping up at loads of random conferences and giving speeches. But it did feel like he's starting to get it more. But especially when he first came in, and obviously there's the famous 4-4-3 interview where he wants to play a formation with an extra player. Maybe he's under something there. Use the goalkeeper in possession or something. But yeah, I definitely think so far you can't say the Chelsea ownership has been a success because you've taken a side who won trophies fairly consistently under Roman Abramovich, and you have managed to win nothing so far and just keep making everything worse. It feels like every season, like even this season, they've removed the two guys who were running the youth setup, who'd been there for over 20 years, and replaced them with new guys. And is that going to work? There's just so much going on. So, and I think especially the big issue with Chelsea is the sale of homegrown players. It doesn't feel like they totally understand that. I get it from an FFP standpoint because you'd rather lose Conor Gallagher than take a huge points deduction, stuff like that. But it just doesn't feel, you lose that connection then.
Yeah.
Players get, when you have players who play for the badge, you get the connection with the fans more. That doesn't happen if all the players have come from abroad. You need players who have been homegrown. You need players who have been in the community, who understand what it's like to be a fan. Not even specifically of that club, because you see with players like Harry Kane's probably the most famous example, was an Arsenal fan growing up. He plays for Tottenham for most of his career, and he becomes this cult hero, this icon in the eyes of Tottenham fans. And so they don't need to have been from the area. They just need to get it. They need to get English football. And I think that in that regard, that's where a lot of the owners fall apart.
Very much so. As you said, with the homegrown players, it's what we spoke about at the start. Is that they don't see what the fans see. From a Chelsea point of view, when you see players like Conor Gallagher, when you see players like Trevor Chalobah, even on their bad days, you still see a player that has loyalty, that has pride, that bleeds for bleeds blue. And it's the same at other clubs. You have those homegrown players, those players that have been there all their career. Gallagher had been at Chelsea since he was for 6 or 7. That all Conor Gallagher knew in his footballing career was Chelsea, and all the fans knew him as was that he was Chelsea, and it's losing players like that, which is where the ownership lose the fan base very, very quickly. Because and to be fair, Todd Bowley probably doesn't realise he's doing it. He probably just goes, that's the way to make money. I'm going to do it, and doesn't understand what the problems are with it. But yeah, I think Chelsea and Wrexham. Also, I know they're in different leagues, so it is hard to compare slightly there. But if you take them just as themselves, the difference, like Wrexham, brilliant investment. They've bought the right players. They've been smart about it. Chelsea have thrown so much money at it, and not much of it has worked. and that is a massive problem. This season it might be, and again Chelsea on their fourth, fifth manager in the Todd Boehly era, maybe even more than that. It's crazy. It might be working now. But
third permanent manager, isn't it? I know we had the whole Bruno Salter, Frank Lampard situation. Fourth permanent manager, Tuchel. Obviously, they didn't hire
Potter, Lampard, and
not Lampard. He was temporary.
He was, but that was a substantial stint for me.
Is it?
Yeah, okay. I think so. He did a couple of months in at the end of the season.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a mess. That's definitely one that Boehly and Chelsea need to sort out.
Yeah, again, it just feels that it's a very business, very corporate approach to it all. When they're getting rid of these players, it's like they're not players, they're just members of staff. They're just numbers on the screen. It's like a video game.
Yeah. And
you just get rid of one, and you don't care about the individual to a certain extent, and it's that callous approach to football that I think sees fans disconnected with it.
And what that reminds me of more, and I think what you see more similarities is with trading in America, with the baseball and the NFL. When you don't have loyal players because 1 minute they're playing for one team, and then they could get drafted and traded to another team.
I mean, it is kind of insane, isn't it, that you can just trade someone off to a different club and they just have to go there.
Yeah.
And imagine we had that.
Yeah.
Like, sorry. Like, Guardiola has to walk up to a City player and go, sorry, mate. Sorry, Calvin Phillips. I'm shipping you off to Wolverhampton because we want a Wolves player or something like that.
Yeah.
Insanity that happens. But that's another point. I don't understand some of the elements of American
That's the problem.
Sports.
The sports are so different that Boehly comes in and he treats the transfers like that. He thinks he can just, especially with these FFP signings we're starting to see now, thinks he can just trade Ian Matson for Amari Kellyman and then call it a day.
Well, also, it almost is a trade in that sense. But also, you have, because there aren't youth setups in America, you don't have youth academies, you don't have homegrown players. They don't have that same connection.
Yeah.
Because players come out of these universities and then everyone sits in a room and tries and auctions for them. I don't know even that. It's a draft system, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I know there was in the women's game, but it's an American owner who said that system should be in England. And I'm just like, well, no. Definitely not. But we have I love our youth academy setup. I love the youth setup in England. We've seen so many great footballers come through it, and we'll continue to see that because it is a successful model. And obviously, models where you have to send your child to university, it favours rich people who can afford to do that and lessens the quality. So, I really like how we do our youth setups around here, and it does mean you get players who have connections to the club because they've been there for 14 years, because they know everyone there, because it's familiar, it's home, they get the fans, they die for the badge. That's something that you just can't replicate in American sports.
Yeah.
Because of, the numerous things we've mentioned.
Yeah.
And let's touch on another club then, the final one of this video. There's so many in the Premier League. As I mentioned in the intro, 50% of the Premier League clubs now have at least one American as a shareholder with over 10% in the business. 9 of the 10 have that is a controlling stake. So that is a lot of football clubs.
Yeah.
There's a lot of football clubs that have that. And I don't think there are any. I think there's one with English ownership still.
I'm trying to think now.
And that's top 2 tiers. I think Luton Town are the only ones, at least that have been in the Premier League the last few seasons.
Yeah.
Because in the Premier League they are all owned by external, foreign investors. So. Yeah, there's not much English ownership left in English football, which is crazy. And let's touch on Liverpool then. Obviously, Fenway Sports Group bought it in 2010. They were the next after the Glazers, really, to come in. The Glazers, that's been an interesting one. But again, there are a million videos talking about the Glazers and what's gone wrong there. So I thought Liverpool would be more interesting, especially following Ian Graham's book on how to win the Premier League. That's been gaining a lot of attention recently, published just a month ago, I think, where he was involved at Liverpool and he spoke about the mess that was the sporting director situation at Liverpool, where there was 2 sporting directors, or a sporting director, a director of football, and Brendan Rodgers, and they had the power to veto each other's transfers. So if Rodgers didn't like the sporting director's transfer, he'd veto it and say, we're not doing that. But then, because the sporting director would then get spiteful, he'd veto Brendan Rodgers. And so they all just veto each other until they end up with the sixth option on the list, and then they end up signing Christian Benteke. So you get those sort of situations, don't you? And that came from the Americans just not understanding it. They put these staff in positions of power without them understanding how to do that job. Until Klopp came in, they didn't have any order. Klopp came in, everything changed. He changed the recruitment setup there. He pretty much was the head of the operation, which is quite weird. We don't see that in modern football now.
No.
In modern football, every team has a director of football, a sporting director who runs the club, and then the manager is very much tactics, training. It's more of a head coach role now than a manager. I think the only true managers that were in the Premier League was Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola. Maybe Mikel Arteta, because he's a bit more ingrained now in the culture, but you've still got people working above him who will handle recruitment. So it's very interesting that they don't get held accountable, reading that. But with Klopp, they didn't really have any organisation. I still don't think the investment from FSG has ever been anywhere near the top clubs. People say, "Oh, Liverpool with Jurgen Klopp, how has it been a success?" They've only won one Premier League title. They've only won one Champions League title. But I would argue that they have been working on such a limited budget compared to other clubs. And I know people are saying, "Well, look at the outlay that they spent on the front line." But a lot of that was generated off of transfer revenue. A lot of that was generated off of other incomings from competition winnings, from finishing high in the Premier League. There wasn't much investment from FSG over the last few years. And that's slightly gone up because, they've signed recently Nunez, Diaz, Jota. They've definitely invested heavily in their front line. But then they sold Firmino. They sold Mane. So it's been interesting to see that transition and how they have had to spend a bit of money. But a lot of their success has been because of very smart recruitment from Jurgen Klopp and the recruitment staff around him, who he worked with, bringing in players like Salah, like Alisson, like Van Dijk, all on really good deals for the time. So, and obviously over the last, I think, 5 years, John Henry, who is the owner of Fenway Sports Group, has been trying to sell Liverpool every single summer, and it still doesn't work because he doesn't like football. He's not interested. And that says it all, doesn't it? He has one of the most successful clubs in the Premier League and he doesn't care because it is just a business to him. It is just numbers on a screen. And I think that's the issue when you get owners who just don't get it. And I think that's the big difference between Roman Abramovich and why Chelsea fans felt such an affiliation to him. It's not just because he took a club in Chelsea who weren't very good before him. They'd never won anything. Well, they hadn't won anything major in a very long time. And obviously he took them. And that's going to be a positive feeling. But it's more that he got football. He went to watch the games before he wasn't allowed in the UK anymore. He did always show that support. He did invest heavily. And I think that is the key difference. He understood what it meant to football fans. But we just don't see that with the American owners, with the Saudi Arabian owners. It is just money.
And that's the thing. You get the American owners who either don't like the sport or just treat it like a business. You get the Saudi Arabian owners or Qatari owners who, for them, it doesn't matter. City owners just give them another few $100 million and then just go, "Oh, that's a shame." They don't even notice it go out of their bank account. It's one of them. It's
I like the thought that all their billions are just in a bank account.
Just massive bank account.
That way.
Barclays.
It looks ridiculous on the screen. It doesn't even fit on their online banking app.
They drop Cash Point. Take a tenner out.
The rulers of Saudi Arabia have to go to the bank.
It's a shame. It's very rare now in football that you get an owner who clearly just loves the club.
Yeah, and I think that is a real shame. But it's an interesting bit. I don't think we're at a melting point yet. I don't think we're at a point where Americans are taking over and ruining the sport. Obviously, we're going to put that in the title, so you guys click it. But there is definitely a conversation to be had about how we can control the current expansion of the Premier League. Yeah. I don't think people who own Premier League football clubs and ultimately therefore have the say in how the Premier League runs going forwards have everyone's best interests at heart.
No.
And I think we see that with a lot of the deals, a lot of the decisions that are being made at Premier League level don't reflect that of what the fans want to see. And I think especially with the Super League, especially with that still being floated around, especially with Real Madrid and Barcelona. I know they're not Premier League, but that is still part of the same discussion, still trying to get the Super League off the ground.
Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few years with American ownership. I think it'll only go up in English sports because there's a lot of wealthy Americans and there are a lot of English football clubs. So Yeah, how long until we see a Step 8 side owned by Jeff Bezos soaring through the ranks?
I think the one saving grace will be that if it ever got to... So say that if there was a scheduled game, a scheduled Premier League game to be played in America, I think that the fans would do enough to get that overturned.
Like with the Super League.
Yeah.
I think there would be mass
protests. And I think that would be
protests.
warranted. If there was mass protests, I think that should be allowed because...
But the question mark comes, why, at what point do they listen? Because with the Super League, if every English football fan for that club, well, exactly, and I think that was a huge part of it, the fact there were ex-Chelsea players, people who got it on the board there. But if every football fan of that club stopped watching that team because they're competing in the Super League, that has a huge impact on revenue.
Yeah.
But for one match, I wouldn't be surprised if the Premier League tried to take that risk, tried to push the boat out, because they know there is money in doing that. By playing a game in America, by having the fans out there, by charging £1,000 a ticket.
But who supports Birmingham in America?
I don't know. I don't
that's
know
my thing.
who these Americans are. I'm going to be honest there.
They want to put they want to put Birmingham Wrexham out there. I'd love to find out how many fans there are.
I know football's massive out there, but I just don't see where these people who have these like £1,000 to go and watch a
the English
football
fans
game
won't go because they won't be able to afford it, and B, if you're telling me Steve from Birmingham is going to travel out on a Tuesday night, fly over to America on the Sunday or the Monday and go watch his team, not a chance.
But equally, that League One game is going to be like watching the World Cup final compared to some of the MLS football. So just neutrals will probably go to watch proper football.
Yeah, no.
But that'd be interesting. And also American football pitches are terrible. We've seen that in pre-season. We're going to see it at World Cup 26. We're going to see it at the Fast School Club World Cup next summer.
Yeah.
American football pitches are terrible. We saw it at the most recent Copa America. But anyway, I think that's a lot that we've discussed in there. There's a lot for you guys to get your teeth into, and get involved in the comments down below. Keep the discussion going. As I say, I'm sure you guys will have all of your own opinions based on your experiences and the club you support. If their American owners have been great, and I'm sure there's a lot of American owners obviously that we haven't touched on that have done terrible things or have done brilliant things. So do get involved in the comments down below. If you have enjoyed that, we have another video on screen now where you can watch us talk about this week's news. It's our first ever episode of TFC News, bringing a new series to the channel, so go and check that out. But that is everything from us today. Thank you guys very, very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.